close your eyes for 1 second. Someone just said something that made your blood boil. Your heart is racing. You want to react. But what if I told you the strongest people in history were never the ones who fought back, they were the ones who couldn't be shaken in the first place? Today, I'll show you how. 7 secrets the Stoics use to become the one person any confrontation cannot destroy. Listen to me carefully. Before another person can take control of your actual life, they have to first win control of something considerably smaller and considerably more vulnerable. Your emotions. And the part most people would rather not hear, because the part most people would rather not hear contains the explanation for a thing that has been quietly costing them for years. Almost everyone hands that power over without realizing it. Not in a war, not in a crisis, in a meeting. At the dinner table. Inside a text message arrived at the wrong moment. In a single sentence, spoken by the right person, on a Tuesday afternoon that you did not see coming. One insult. One certain look. One quiet humiliation that no one else in the room would have flagged as anything more than ordinary small talk. And in the half second after it lands, your heartbeat changes. Your breathing moves up into the top half of your chest. Your mind begins ransacking itself for the perfect comeback that never materializes, because in that precise instant, you are no longer thinking. You are being moved. Now picture something different. The same scene. The same person who has spent years knowing exactly which way you are going to flinch. They expect anger. They expect fear. They expect the familiar version of you that has, by now, reliably shown up every time the situation called for the performance. Instead, you are simply looking at them. Not smiling. Not glaring. Looking at them the way you would look at weather. The way you would look at something that is, at the moment, occurring on the surface of your life, and is therefore no longer in a position to threaten anything underneath it. And the silence you are producing is, to the other person, considerably more frightening than anything you could have said. Because they have just discovered that somehow, without anyone announcing it ahead of time, they have lost access to the part of you that they had. Until this moment. Been able to count on controlling. The lever they were about to pull is no longer connected to anything, and the person who has lost the lever has lost, for that moment, the only weapon they actually had against you. This is not a description of confidence. Confidence, in the way the word is usually used in motivational contexts, is a costume. This is something considerably harder to manufacture and considerably harder to fake. It is psychological freedom. The structural condition in which another human being's behavior, however hostile, however precisely aimed, is no longer capable of moving the weather inside your interior life. 2,000 years ago, a small circle of men operating in the Mediterranean basin mastered this condition. From inside the most hostile environments a human life can be enrolled in: war, betrayal, slavery, exile, political conspiracy, the cumulative grief of burying most of the children they brought into the world. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of an empire that controlled 70 million people. Surrounded by generals who smiled at him in public and conspired against him in private, watching people he had personally trusted arrange his political destruction with the same steady patience the rest of us reserve for filing our taxes. Epictetus, born a slave, owned by a man who had the legal authority to break his body in the way other men have the legal authority to refinance a mortgage, and who spent the years of his enslavement not in the grudging, soured bitterness the situation would have justified, but in the quiet, private, intensely disciplined construction of a mind that turned out to be the most influential instrument of thought the entire subsequent Western tradition was ever going to inherit. And Seneca, the man whose relationship with an emperor who felt, on certain unlucky Tuesdays, like ordering him to open his own veins, spent his final hours not pleading for his life, but teaching calm to the people around him, teaching them, with the same steady voice he had used for decades of correspondence, that the most powerful thing a person could do with the last hours of a constrained life was to refuse to let the constraint dictate the texture of those hours. None of these men was trying to become fearless. Any honest reading of their private writings makes clear that all of them knew specific, personalized, named fear very well. Marcus feared the loss of his children with a regularity the philosophers generally do not advertise. Epictetus feared the next broken bone. Seneca feared the humiliation of dying badly in front of the people whose respect he had spent his adult life constructing. They were training themselves to become untouchable. A different achievement. An achievement that does not require the absence of fear. It requires instead that fear no longer translates automatically into action. That the impulse inside you that the other person is trying to engineer no longer moves on the architect's schedule when the architect reaches for the switch. The strongest person in any confrontation is not the one who speaks the loudest. It is not the one with the most impressive credentials, or the one with the most practiced vocal projection, or even the one who is technically right. It is the one whose emotions, whose actual interior weather cannot be set by another person's behavior on the same schedule the rest of the room is still being run on. What follows is the same set of tools these men used, distilled into a format that does not require you to be emperor or to be born into slavery in order to apply them on your next Tuesday afternoon. Not motivation. Not inspirational copy. Practical interior architecture, designed and engineered for the specific moment when someone is currently trying, in real time, to take something from you that you did not agree to give them. Stay through the end. Secret 4 rearranges the way you will visualize, for the rest of your life, every angry person who has ever stood in front of you. And Secret 6 is so consistently misunderstood that the entire modern internet is currently practicing it backward. By the time this is over, you will not just know how to survive confrontations that until this afternoon. You had been quietly losing. You will become the actual kind of person confrontations are no longer able to dismantle. Let's begin. Secret 1, stop renting out your peace to people who have already forgotten yours. Most people think they lose control at the moment someone insults them. They do not. They lose control considerably earlier in the silent quarter second in which they decided, internally, that another person's verdict about them was worth more than their own. From that single decision, everything else becomes mechanical. Every word in the room becomes a potential wire. Every expression becomes a weapon. Every sentence the other person might land on you becomes a verdict on your actual worth, which it was never, in any defensible reading of the available evidence. Competent to deliver. The confrontation has already been won, just not by you. Marcus Aurelius understood something that the modern mind, with all of its accumulated resources, still has not absorbed. He never expected the world to speak kindly to him. He expected misunderstanding. He expected betrayal. He expected criticism, contempt, and dismissal, because human nature. Across every century it has ever been studied in, has never made anyone a different promise. The mistake was never that people judged him. The mistake would have been allowing those judgments to quietly rewrite the truth he already knew in his own evidence about who he actually was. Think about the most recent comment that stayed in your mind longer than it should have. The person who said it has, in all probability, moved on within minutes. They went home. They had dinner. They slept peacefully. They have not thought about the moment once, in any meaningful sense, since the moment they themselves were producing it, and yet the moment continued to live inside you, charging rent, far longer than it ever lived inside the person who originated it. That is the quiet, ongoing tragedy of an ordinary mind that has not been trained. It keeps paying emotional rent to people who no longer remember the conversation. Here is the sentence that, internalized, begins to reverse the cycle. An insult is never a fact. It is an invitation. Someone is inviting you to believe a story about yourself. They extend the invitation through sarcasm, humiliation, mockery, or the raw architectures of anger. But an invitation has exactly as much power as you allow it to have. A letter unopened cannot hurt you. A lie believed becomes a prison. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that has been, on purpose, cracked. Would you blame your own face for the distorted reflection? Of course not. You would understand that the mirror is the damaged instrument, not the face that the mirror is supposed to be reflecting. Human judgment operates under exactly the same physical logic. Every opinion another person forms passes through their fears, their insecurities, their private history, their jealousy, their unresolved pain, before it ever reaches you. You are not seeing yourself when another person describes you. You are seeing the current condition of their mirror. This is why genuinely steady people seem almost impossible to offend. It is not because they do not hear criticism. They hear it. They simply stopped, some time ago, confusing other people's perceptions with anything resembling objective reality. They know their character has been built by their own daily actions, not by whatever any particular passerby, in any particular mood, happened to be willing to say about them on a particular afternoon. When your identity is built on evidence rather than on applause, insults begin to lose the central place they once occupied inside your day. There is a second reason people become easy to manipulate on this exact axis. Deep down, many of them are still negotiating their own worth with themselves, quietly, in the unlit rooms of their interior. They are secretly hoping that everyone they meet will confirm the things they are not yet sure are true. Intelligent enough. Capable enough. Respected enough. The manipulator senses that uncertainty instantly. He did not create the insecurity. He simply discovered where it already existed and pressed on it calmly, deliberately, with the precision of a person who has spent considerable time studying the exact architecture of your doubts. Test this. If a complete stranger walked up to you today and insisted the sky were green, would you spend the rest of your Tuesday defending the color blue? Of course you would not. Confidence does not waste time arguing with obvious nonsense. The same physics applies to your character. The things you genuinely know about yourself no longer require endless defense. From today forward, practice a single quiet habit before reacting to any piece of criticism that arrives in your direction. Ask yourself, in the actual moment, calmly, does this sentence change one objective fact about who I actually am? If the answer is no, and most of the time, when you actually look, the answer is no, then nothing real has been damaged. Your integrity is intact. Your values are intact. Your effort is intact. Only noise has entered the room, and noise has no authority unless you specifically surrender it. This is why the calmest person in every confrontation almost always appears to the room around them strangely hidden. They are not searching for the perfect comeback because they never accepted the accusation the original accusation was attached to in the first place. While everyone else is fighting to protect an identity that was, all along, built on other people's approval, they are standing on something considerably less breakable, an identity that was settled on the evidence long before the argument ever started. Once you stop asking strangers to confirm your worth, you become almost impossible to control. Secret 2, the person who can predict you already owns you. The easiest person in any room to manipulate is not the weakest one. It is the most predictable one. The moment someone knows exactly how you are going to react to a particular stimulus, they no longer have to fight you. They pick up the stimulus, apply it to the right surface of your behavior, and sit back while the response runs the same subroutine it has always run. Anger has a button. Pride has a button. Insecurity has a button. Fear has the most reliable button of all. Because fear has been pre-wired by evolution, and the pre-wiring is so thoroughly installed that you usually cannot distinguish, in real time, between a fear that is genuinely protecting you and a fear that is being exploited by the person standing directly in front of you. This is why two people can hear the exact same insult and walk away with completely different futures. One walks away wrecked, replaying every word of the encounter for weeks, working on the perfect comeback, micromanaging the memory. The other barely remembers the encounter by dinner. The insult was not stronger for the first person than it was for the second. The insult was the same. The difference was in what was already, structurally built underneath each reaction. One person's emotions had been quietly programmed, for years, by the outside world. The other person's mind belonged, with the kind of quiet discipline it takes a long time to install, entirely to himself. Seneca, a man who lived, for the better part of his professional adult life, inside a room with an emperor who could terminate him on suspicion, and whose survival depended on the discipline of never letting the wrong feeling reach his face at the wrong second, wrote that emotion becomes dangerous the moment it starts making decisions before reason has even entered the room. Sit with that. Every regret you are currently carrying almost certainly began with a reaction that felt entirely justified in the moment. The angry text. The words you have spent the better part of a year wishing you could retrieve. The relationship that ended in 5 minutes after years of accumulated trust. Most lives are not destroyed by evil intentions. They are destroyed by temporary emotions making permanent decisions. Now visualize standing across from someone whose only goal in the next 30 seconds is to make you lose control. They interrupt you while you are still mid-sentence. They raise their voice until the people at the surrounding tables glance over. They laugh loudly, theatrically, in the precise register designed to imply that whatever you were just saying is also somehow mildly embarrassing to be associated with. Every move is calculated. Every escalation has been pre-tested on the other people they have used as practice. Every word has been chosen to push the specific buttons they believe, based on the previous 5 minutes of observation. You are most likely to have installed in exactly the places they are pushing. Why? Because the second you become emotional, you stop observing. You stop listening for what is happening. You stop thinking strategically about the situation. Your brain, which had been operating in evaluation mode, shifts abruptly into survival mode, and a person who has been forced into survival mode can always be controlled by someone who has remained throughout the same exchange in something much closer to neutral. Professional interrogators understand this. Elite negotiators understand this. Great leaders understood this centuries before modern psychology was able to diagram it on a whiteboard. They all knew something quietly devastating about human nature. People rarely reveal who they actually are when they are comfortable. They reveal themselves when they are emotionally overwhelmed. That is why manipulative people in almost every domain you will ever encounter them. Create pressure first. Pressure removes the mask. Pressure reveals the script. Pressure is, in a precise sense, their instrument the way a stethoscope is a doctor's instrument. But here is something almost nobody realizes. Every confrontation you are going to walk into for the rest of your life is a psychological test disguised as a conversation. The other person is silently asking one question, repeatedly. With each calibrated escalation, can I control what is happening inside this person's mind? Every defensive explanation, every raised voice, every attempt to prove yourself in real time to a person who has already demonstrated they are not listening to your explanation answers the question for them. Yes, the answer is yes, you can. Marcus Aurelius refused to become predictable because he understood that predictability is the language of slaves. Not the slaves wearing chains in the public square, slaves to praise, slaves to anger, slaves to ego, slaves to the opinions of strangers whose names you will not remember by next quarter. Freedom, the real version, begins the precise moment your reactions stop belonging to other people. The next time someone is set up to expect you to become angry in a meeting, on a comment thread, in the specific kitchen of the specific household where the evening's argument has been quietly assembling itself since Tuesday, do something that feels, in your body, slightly unnatural. Pause, not because you do not have a response. Because your silence is forcing your mind to return before your emotions have even arrived in the room. That single pause is where power lives. Inside it, your identity comes back online. Inside it, your judgment wakes up. Inside it, you become genuinely dangerous not because you can destroy the other person, but because they have just realized. With the slow, dawning clarity of someone who has misplaced a tool they were depending on, that they can no longer control what is happening inside you. And the moment someone loses the ability to predict your next move, they lose the ability to manipulate your future. Secret 3, stop fighting the person in front of you. Study the pattern underneath them. Most people spend their entire lives reacting to faces instead of patterns. They believe every confrontation is about the specific individual who happens, at this particular moment, to be standing directly in front of them. In reality, it is almost never personal. Human behavior follows invisible patterns that repeat across generations, workplaces, families, friendships, and entire cultures. The names change. The faces change. The exact words being shouted change. But fear, insecurity, pride, envy, and the desperate need to control something, because everything else has slipped, these wear different masks and play the same game. The Stoics trained themselves to observe before they judged, because they understood that emotion hides the truth while observation reveals it. Consider the person screaming at you over what is, by any honest accounting, a small mistake. A misfiled report. A sentence in an email that could have been worded slightly better. A 5-minute delay on a deadline no one was actually going to die over. Their reaction does not match the event. And the reason their reaction does not match the event is that the event was never what they were actually reacting to. You are witnessing the moment when months of internal pressure, the promotion they applied for and did not receive, the unspoken fear that their authority in the room has been declining for 2 quarters. The relationship they are watching quietly disintegrate through a window they keep pretending they are not standing at, search for a target, and landed on the most conveniently available surface. You were simply the nearest wall when the wave hit. This does not mean you excuse bad behavior. It does not mean you become blind to the injustice of someone shedding in your direction. The accumulated emotional weather of a life they have not yet built the tools to manage. It means you stop confusing explanation with agreement. The moment you understand why a person behaves the way they behave, their behavior becomes predictable instead of frightening. And what is predictable loses most of its capacity to intimidate. Knowledge does not remove conflict. Knowledge removes confusion. And confusion is the exact atmosphere fear grows strongest in. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, with the kind of disciplined regularity a man keeps only because he has been badly tested and intends to remain intact for future tests, that every difficult person he would ever encounter was acting in accordance with what they believed, at that moment, was right, even when they were completely wrong. That single reframe changes permanently the way you see confrontation. The angry person, in the moment they are being angry at you, is almost never trying to become the villain of their own story. They believe they are protecting themselves. They believe they are defending a pride that has quietly come to feel load-bearing. They believe they are correcting an injustice the rest of the room cannot see. Understanding this does not make their behavior acceptable. It simply prevents you from carrying their emotional weather into your own nervous system, where it was never meant to arrive, where it can do absolutely no diagnostic or corrective work, and where it can and will, if allowed to settle in, quietly accomplish exactly the destruction it appeared to be aimed at the other person in the first place. Watch people carefully when they are under pressure. Listen less to the words they are choosing and more to the structures of emotion they are inadvertently unable to hide. A trembling voice hidden inside loudly projected confidence. A forced smile that disappears the moment they believe no one is watching them. Endless public criticism that quietly reveals, if you read the same person with any kindness, the deep private insecurities the criticism is being deployed to protect. Human beings consistently confess the truth they are most actively trying to conceal. The louder they perform certainty, the more desperately they are usually trying to silence the particular doubts the certainty is sitting on top of. This is why genuinely steady people rarely become shocked by insults. They hear something quieter underneath the insult itself. They hear fear asking to be granted more control. They hear insecurity requesting validation through the most aggressive, indirect channels available to a nervous system that cannot, on its own, ask directly. They hear pain wearing the specific costume that pain wears most often in rooms where admitting pain is not, the person believes, a survivable option, while everyone else is reacting to the performance. The steady person is quietly studying the person behind it. Observation creates distance. Distance protects judgment from becoming another casualty of the emotion that is, in the moment, attempting to do the maximum amount of damage it can before anyone has the chance to step back and look at it properly. Imagine a physician standing beside a patient running a high fever. He does not become angry at the fever. He studies it. Because symptoms always point toward a deeper cause, and the cause, not the fever, is where the actual treatment has to be directed if anything is going to change. The Stoics approached difficult human beings the exact same way. Anger was never the disease. It was the symptom. Pride was never the disease. It was the symptom. Until you understood the hidden wound underneath the behavior, you would spend your entire life arguing with symptoms while the actual cause quietly survived, completely untouched, in the place no one had been willing to look. The moment you begin seeing patterns instead of personalities, something almost magical happens. Confrontation stops feeling like a personal attack and starts looking like information. Every reaction in the room is telling you something. Every accusation is quietly revealing something. Every calculated provocation is exposing a weakness the other person is, in real time, doing their absolute best to make sure you do not see. And you are seeing it. Suddenly, the room has changed. They believe they are studying you. But without realizing it, they have become the one being understood. Secret 4, the battle you are seeing is never the battle actually happening. This is the secret the opening of this video promised would rearrange the way you see every angry person for the rest of your life. One of the most expensive mistakes human beings consistently make during confrontation is the assumption that they are fighting over the words being spoken, at the volume being spoken, and the tone being spoken. They are not. Words are only the surface. Every argument is hiding a second conversation that no participant has agreed to say out loud. Beneath every accusation lives a deeper emotion that almost no one involved in the fight has the language, at that moment, to specify clearly. The fear of losing respect in a room where respect is the actual currency. The fear of losing control of a situation that is, for the first time in months, visibly not responding to the directions they have been issuing to it. The fear quieter than the other two, considerably harder to admit, considerably more common, of not being enough. If you only answer the words, you will spend your entire life losing battles that were never, in any honest reconstruction of what actually happened, about the words. This is why the Stoics trained themselves to see beneath appearances. They spent hours and days in some documented cases with some documented teachers developing the specific interior muscle required to look past what the room was performing at them in order to see the architecture of what was actually unfolding underneath the visible performance. Epictetus believed and built a substantial portion of his pedagogical method around the principle that no human action exists in the world without an underlying judgment that arrived first. Before a person raises their voice, their mind has already constructed a framework that, in their direct experience of it, justifies the raising. Before they insult you, they have already sometime earlier that morning, or the night before, or in the long accumulation that has produced their current psychology, convinced themselves that the insult they are preparing to deliver is, in the most sincere sense available to them, justified. By the time that confrontation has reached your ears, it has already been unfolding inside their mind for hours, or days, or in some cases, years. You are simply arriving at the final scene of a story you never helped write and were never invited to the table for. Look at someone who explodes over the smallest concrete thing: a forgotten message, a 5-minute delay, a disagreement over what color the kitchen should be repainted in. Common sense reports that the reaction is dramatically out of proportion with the event. And common sense is correct. The reaction is out of proportion, because the event was only the spark. The actual fire had been quietly burning for a long time. In a part of their life they have not been able to bring themselves to tend. People rarely explode because of what just happened. People explode because of everything they have been carrying, in private, that the rest of the room was not invited to see. This reframe, when you actually install it, changes everything. Suddenly you stop asking, how do I defend myself from this attack? You begin asking with considerable more useful precision, what private pain is currently speaking through this person, in my direction, because the pain has nowhere else to go. That single question puts you in a different room entirely from the rest of the people who are still reacting to noise. While they are trapped inside the emotion, you are listening for the quiet signal underneath the noise. While they are performing the version of themselves the situation is now requiring them to perform. You are searching for the actual person, the one underneath the performance, the one the performance was designed to protect from being visible. And understanding, consistently across every domain of human life, gives you more leverage than reaction ever has. Marcus Aurelius spent years surrounded by betrayal, by political ambition of the most patient and most meticulous varieties, by men who smiled at him in public while quietly constructing the precise speech with which they intended to dismantle him in the Senate. If he had reacted emotionally to every insult, every lie, every minor act of public disrespect, the emotional tax alone would have destroyed him long before any enemy had the chance to complete the work. Instead, he trained himself, with the patient regularity of a man who knew he was going to keep being attacked as long as he kept being alive, to remember a single, almost absurdly simple idea. People can only ever act in accordance with the character they have already managed to build. A dishonest person is consistently going to produce dishonesty. A fearful person is consistently going to produce fear. An insecure person is consistently going to produce the exact architecture of control that, to an outside observer, looks more like attack than anything else. Expecting anything different is like expecting fire to produce ice. Notice what happens in real time when someone is busy trying to humiliate another person in front of a crowd. They believe they are exposing the other person's weakness, and they may, in some narrow sense, even be right about it. But if you keep watching closely, you will notice that something else is quietly happening in the same moment. They are revealing to anyone with eyes open enough to see it exactly how dependent they have become on other people's attention in order to feel, even briefly. The kind of powerful. A genuinely powerful person never needs an audience. Only fragile egos require witnesses. The louder the public performance of authority becomes, the more clearly the same performance is confirming exactly how empty the authority is without the audience's permission to be real. This is why genuinely wise people rarely rush to respond. Silence, for them, is not absence. Silence is the entrance to a room where information is being received that emotion, in its urgency, would have completely disallowed the person from picking up on. Every pause they give themselves reveals another angle. Every second of patient silence uncovers another motivation the room did not intend for the patient person to see. By the time the emotionally overwhelmed person has finished speaking, the quietly observing person has usually understood several orders of magnitude more than the speaker intended to reveal. This is also why Stoicism is consistently getting misinterpreted by people who have only seen the word on a t-shirt or heard it in a podcast that had not done the reading. People think Stoicism teaches suppression. It does not. It teaches a level of awareness at which the emotions are still being felt, still being honored, still being recognized for the legitimate signals they are, and yet are no longer automatically allowed to dictate what happens next. You still hear the insult. You still recognize the disrespect. But instead of being physically pulled inside the emotion, you begin studying it. You become an observer before you become a participant. That single shift transforms confrontation from a threat into a source of information. And the greatest advantage in any conflict does not belong to the strongest voice, the sharpest argument, or the cleverest verbal comeback. It belongs to the person who is able to see the invisible forces that are driving everyone else's behavior while remaining suitably invisible from their own behavior's perspective. Because once you learn to see beneath the surface, people stop being unpredictable, and manipulation stops being effective. Secret 5 composure is never produced in public. It is forged in private. Most people pray for composure only after life has placed them in the middle of the exact situation composure was invented to handle. They want to be able to remain still in the middle of humiliation without having ever practiced being still during any of the ordinary, unglamorous, less cinematic moments in which actual stillness was being trained. But the mind does not suddenly become disciplined because the situation suddenly became important. The mind falls to the level of its training. This is the part of Marcus Aurelius's interior teaching that gets edited out of every modern motivational excerpt. The mind, when it is tested, does not rise. It falls. It falls to whatever level of discipline has been quietly, invisibly, without applause, installed inside it over the entire stretch of preparation that preceded the test. Marcus Aurelius did not remain calm because he had been born different. Every evening, while the rest of the empire slept, he was inside his own study, training his own mind through a practice that produced no external output anyone could see, no metric anyone could measure, no applause anyone in the room was around to deliver, before another battle opened on the northern frontier, before another betrayal quietly arrived through a corridor lined with men pretending loyalty, before another difficult conversation arrived at his office with the morning's dispatches. He had already rehearsed the moment inside his own thinking. He had already argued with the version of himself that, under pressure, would have wanted to lash out, and had already, in private, won the argument with the disciplined version that was, by then, practiced at winning it. This is why the Stoics treated their ordinary inconveniences with disproportionate seriousness. Not because the inconveniences were, on their own, important. They were not. Because the inconveniences were the actual training ground. A delayed meal. A rude stranger with a loud opinion and no information behind it. Endless traffic on an afternoon you had not budgeted for it. A promise broken by someone whose reliability you had, until the moment of the broken promise, been quietly depending on. Most modern readers of the older philosophy dismiss these moments as too small to carry any meaningful weight. The Stoics believed exactly the opposite. They believed the small irritations were the gymnasium in which the muscle that mattered was actually being built. Secret sixth silence is not the absence of power. It is power refusing to perform. Most people misunderstand silence because they have confused it, in their own mental model, with weakness. They assume that the person who speaks the most is the strongest in the room, and the person who says the least has, by virtue of the withholding, nothing worth offering. History has, every single time the question has been put to it, suggested the opposite. The loudest person in the room is almost always trying to prove something. The calmest person in the room, more often than not, has nothing left to prove at all. There is a profound difference between having nothing to say and choosing deliberately not to spend what you do have. The human mind is deeply uncomfortable with pauses. The moment a conversation goes quiet, something inside us rushes to fill the empty space. We explain too much. We defend too much. We unintentionally reveal more than we ever intended to, because silence makes the ego feel exposed in a way that loudness, paradoxically, never does. Manipulative people have understood this instinct better than most of the psychologists who study manipulation professionally. They know that if they remain quiet, after delivering an accusation, many people will panic and begin confessing to things that were never, in fact, being questioned. Cato the Younger, a Roman politician of the most uncompromising and most legendarily unbending variety, a man whose entire public life consisted of refusing, on principle, the kinds of accommodations that would have made the rest of his career considerably easier, became famous not for any of the speeches he gave, but for the speeches he did not give, in rooms where the rest of the political class expected him to give them. His opponents would provoke him openly, hoping to engineer an emotional reaction that would damage his reputation in the moment. Instead, they were met with absolute stillness, as the silence stretched longer than the room had prepared itself to tolerate it something unexpected. And to the opponents genuinely disorienting, happened, the crowd stopped watching Cato and started watching the person who had been trying to provoke him. Without him saying a single word, the entire weight of the room's attention quietly shifted direction. There is a hard-edged psychological reason this works. Human beings consistently interpret unnecessary explanation as evidence of genuine uncertainty. The more desperately someone tries to convince the world of something, the more the world quietly begins wondering why they are investing the energy. Quiet confidence creates curiosity. Desperate confidence creates suspicion. And this is part of why genuinely self-assured people rarely spend much of their time actively announcing they are self-assured. They allow consistent conduct to do the speaking that ego would normally, on every other timeline, do for them. Picture someone insulting you directly in front of 10 other people in a room where everyone heard it. Every eye turns towards you. Everyone is waiting, with the particular quality of attention that only public spectacle manages to produce, for the explosion they have already, in their own minds, choreographed. Your heart is beating harder than it was a moment ago. Your pride is demanding immediate response. Your ego is quietly observing that if you remain silent in this moment, the room might conclude wrongly. But with the kind of confidence wrong conclusions always carry, that you have somehow lost. But the Stoics understood something that contradicts completely what the ego was whispering. The crowd is not only watching your response, they are also measuring your self-control. The person who remains composed under live pressure tends to earn considerably more genuine respect than the person who, in the moment, won the argument itself. Silence is not pretending nothing happened. Silence is choosing the right moment rather than the immediate moment. There are words that heal because they arrive after wisdom has had a chance to speak. And there are words that destroy because they were born from anger, not judgment. Once a sentence leaves your mouth, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to everyone who heard it, to every interpretation they are going to construct from it, and to every retelling that is going to loosen the original meaning 1 degree further from what you intended it to be. That is why the Stoics treated every unnecessary word as a form of quiet surrender. Watch what happens in real time when someone who is emotionally immature encounters a person who refuses to react. Their discomfort is visible. They repeat the original line in case it was not heard the first time. They raise their voice by a few notches. They take a turn towards sarcasm. They begin searching for another, possibly more effective, weakness to attack. Why this escalating pattern? Because your calm has just interrupted the script they had pre-written for you. They expected resistance. They expected drama. They expected urgently the predictable external confirmation that the lever they were trying to pull was still firmly connected to something inside you. Instead, they have just encountered the genuinely unsettling experience of trying to operate a switch that has quietly ceased to be connected to anything. This is the quiet structural strength of well-chosen silence. It forces the other person to keep revealing themselves at increasing volume, with increasing inconsistency, with increasing visible emotion while you reveal almost nothing in return. Every extra sentence they speak gives you more information. Every impatient reaction exposes another insecurity. Every emotional outburst quietly tells you, with the kind of precision a confession rarely arrives in, exactly where the deepest wounds are still hiding. While they believe they are attacking you, they are unknowingly explaining themselves. And the explanation they are providing is, in some important sense, worth considerably more to you than the explanation you were going to, in your unguarded version of the moment, have offered back. The most skilled practitioners of silence the recorded tradition has ever produced never used silence to appear mysterious. They used silence to protect the one instrument a person can never replace once the instrument has been broken clear, unimpaired judgment. They knew that the first casualty of an emotional confrontation is almost always wisdom. The moment emotion begins speaking with its characteristic warmth and its characteristic speed, judgment quietly leaves the room through the door emotion did not bother to use on the way in. Silence invites judgment back. The next time someone tries to pull you into an unnecessary battle, remember this single sentence, which has been doing considerably more work for considerably longer than most modern readers have understood it to be doing. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. You do not have to answer every accusation. You do not have to defend a character your daily actions have already, with much greater authority than any rebuttal you could construct in the moment. Proven to the people whose judgments actually matter to your actual life. Sometimes the strongest sentence you will ever speak is the one you deliberately choose to leave unsaid. Because the person who has mastered silence is no longer searching for the last word. They have already mastered something considerably more valuable. They have mastered the last emotion. Secret 7: the greatest victory is becoming someone the world can no longer manipulate. There comes a quiet moment in the life of almost everyone who has spent years fighting battles they were never going to win, a moment when they realize, with the kind of clarity that arrives only after the energy to keep fighting has finally dried up, that they have been fighting the wrong battles the entire time. They fought to be understood by people who had, before the fighting began, quietly decided they were not going to listen. They fought to earn respect from people whose internal operating logic had, before the fight started, predetermined that respect in any meaningful amount was never going to be allocated. They fought to defend a reputation that, on close inspection of the available evidence, existed far more vividly inside other people's minds than it ever had inside their own. Then one day they encounter a truth so unexpectedly liberating that it quietly, and from that day forward permanently, rearranges the entire architecture of what they thought they were trying to achieve. The strongest life is not built by controlling people. It is built by becoming impossible for people to control. Most people assume that freedom means having more money, or having more visible status, or having a larger following on a platform that has, by some accident of the algorithm, decided to point a slightly larger number of strangers in their direction this week, or having more influence inside the rooms where influence currently happens to be transacted. The Stoics saw a much deeper, much quieter, much more durable form of freedom. They believed the truly free person is the one whose interior peace no longer depends on circumstances they were never, in any realistic reading, going to completely command. A person who needs constant praise to feel okay is not free. They have simply exchanged visible chains for invisible ones. A person who cannot sleep because of criticism received 6 weeks ago is not free. They have merely upgraded the lock on the chain to a more sophisticated model. A person whose mood rises and falls visibly with every opinion that happens on that particular day. To come within earshot is not free. They have moved the same condition around to a different surface and called the new surface progress. Epictetus understood the architecture of this better than almost anyone in the entire recorded history of the philosophy. He began life as a slave, owned from a young age by another human being who held unrestricted legal authority over where he lived, what he wore, how he spent the days he was given, and what was permitted to be done to his body when the master felt like doing something to his body. He had no money. He had no legal rights. He had no status. He had no network of powerful acquaintances prepared to intervene on his behalf. And yet, while others possessed authority over his external circumstances, they never, throughout the entire span of his enslavement, obtained authority over the only jurisdiction that ever actually mattered, the jurisdiction over his own judgment. That is why history remembers the slave as the teacher, and has forgotten the names of most of the men who, for a few decades of public visibility, believed they owned him. Time has a strange way of exposing, eventually, who was, in fact, the genuinely free person the entire time. Think, carefully and with genuine care, about the people who have hurt you the most. There is, in most lives, a short list of names. At some point, each of them seemed powerful enough to disturb your thoughts for days. In some cases, for years. In a few cases, for so long that you stopped expecting the disturbance to ever end. But look at them now. Many of them have disappeared from your active life entirely. The arguments ended. The insults faded into an archive most people have stopped consulting. The opinions that once felt unbearable have been quietly absorbed into the general background noise of a life that has, in the meantime, continued moving forward. The only thing that survived the entire arc was the person you became because of the experiences those people, without intending to, generated inside you. Pain always leaves. Character decides whether anything of actual worth remains after it does. This is why Marcus Aurelius, in the final years of his life, while losing wars he had been sent to end, losing children to the demographic mathematics of the era, losing the long private struggle with a grief he never fully defeated, kept returning his attention to a single, simple responsibility. Every day offered the same single imperative. Govern your own mind with justice, with courage, with wisdom, with self-control. Not because life was going to become easier. It was not. Because the world is permanently populated by dishonest people, by impatient people, by selfish people, by people whose ongoing project is to misunderstand you on purpose. You cannot remove them from existence. You can only refuse, in a quiet, durable, structurally important way, to let them shape the person you are in the actual process of becoming. Imagine two people walking through the same storm. One spends every step cursing the rain, blaming the wind, demanding that the weather become something it was never going to be. The other quietly adjusts the direction, protects what actually matters, and continues moving forward. Neither controls the storm. The difference is that one wastes strength fighting reality. The other invests strength adapting to it. That is the difference, more compactly stated, between suffering and wisdom. The purpose of Stoicism was never to produce cold, emotionless, unfeeling human beings. It was to produce human beings whose emotions served their values instead of ruling them. People who could love deeply without becoming structurally dependent on the object of the love. People who could lead confidently without becoming quietly indistinguishable from the leader role they were playing. People who could face genuine criticism without becoming bitter. People who could experience the loss of someone they loved without losing themselves in the loss. This is not emotional suppression. This is emotional mastery. And mastery always, without exception, begins exactly where excuses end. If you remember one lesson from the entirety of what we have covered today, let it be this. Every confrontation is secretly asking one question. Who owns my inner world? Is it the stranger on the platform who has decided this afternoon to take something from you? Is it the coworker whose position inside your professional life has so far given them disproportionate leverage over the texture of your Tuesday? Is it the family member whose misunderstanding of you has been quietly, for years, the thing you have arranged your whole self around trying and failing to correct? Or is it you? Every reaction you choose answers that question. Every moment of restraint writes another sentence in the story of the character you are still composing. One day, and this is the day that matters, and that is, if you commit to the practice, closer than the architecture of your current life would suggest, someone will try to provoke you exactly the way they always have. They will expect the same anger. They will expect the same defensiveness. They will expect, with the kind of confidence that habit always carries, the same predictable version of you that existed before the work began. But that day, they will meet someone they no longer recognize. Someone who listens before reacting. Someone who observes before judging. Someone whose peace is no longer available, at any price, for negotiation. And in that quiet moment, without raising a single voice, without winning a single argument, without proving a single point to anyone who was not, even before the conversation started, prepared to be convinced, you will understand what the Stoics spent their entire lives trying, in their own private practice, to confirm. Real power is not the ability to defeat another human being. Real power is reaching the point where another human being no longer has the ability to defeat the person within you. That is not the end of an argument. That is the beginning of freedom. The next time someone insults you, disrespects you, or attempts to drag you into the emotional weather they are currently trying to release onto a room that does not deserve it, do not ask the obvious question. Do not ask how you are going to win this argument, because winning the argument was never the actual assignment. Ask the only question that has ever, in the entire history of this work, been the actual assignment. Who controls my mind? Them or me? Because every confrontation and you have walked into thousands of them already, and you are going to walk into thousands more, offers you exactly two choices. You can react the way the rest of the room is reacting. Or you can respond the way a person who has mastered themselves over the long, slow, unglamorous stretch of years it actually takes to master anything responds. One path gives your peace away. The other path builds a character no insult has ever been engineered to shake. Remember these 7 secrets. They were never designed to help you win more arguments. They were designed to help you stop losing yourself. Because the greatest victory in any life is not proving another person wrong. The greatest victory is becoming someone who no longer needs to. Protect your mind. Master your emotions. Let your silence, when silence is the right response, speak louder than your anger ever could. I will see you in the next one.